Good. Okay, so we talked inspiration. Now we're going to talk about carrying the lessons forward. So Marc Pesce, come on up with your panel. So it's Marc and Wendy Hall and Peter Norvig. And as Peter comes on stage, he has accomplished something that many of us aspired to do and never achieved, and that is to wear something even brighter than what Howard Rheingold wears. So totally awesome. Peter, you just gotta work on your shoes, and then you'll be all set. And Alan, we're gonna take you off stage so you can watch from elsewhere. Say farewell to Alan. Bye, Alan. Great. Welcome to the panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you. One of the most famous poems in the 20th century opens, "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both." That's the road not taken. It's a lament of limitation, that we can't do all of the things that we want to do, but it's also a reminder in that poem that sometimes things are only because we follow blindly in one another's footsteps. And 50 years after the demo, we live in a world that is fundamentally shaped by the demo. To a greater extent, though, it's also being shaped by the paths that are trod every day by billions of people. We got the augmentation we deserve, and it spans a full range from intelligence amplifier to ignorance amplifier. Good morning, my name is Marc Pesce, and this morning we will be taking a look down the roads not taken. They're wild, they're overgrown, sometimes they're a little more than the vaguest of paths, and in a lot of ways they're completely overwhelmed by the superhighways that drive our data-driven culture. Fortunately, we have the benefit of the intelligence and wisdom and experience of two individuals who, through their own work, bringing this world into being, understand how we came to be where we are today. So we'll be asking them if perhaps there's still more to learn from the demo, if there are other ways of being, and other roads that we might still want to explore. Dame Wendy Hall is the Regis Professor of Computer Science, Pro-Vice Chancellor, and Executive Director of the Web Science Institute at the University of Southampton. Peter Norvig is a Director of Research at Google, and was previously the head of Google's core algorithm search group, and before that, headed up NASA Ames Computational Science Division, so you were the chief computer scientist at NASA. Welcome, Wendy. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
All right, Wendy, you have vast, very deep experience in hypermedia systems going back almost 40 years now?
Oh, yeah, okay, 30.
Now, it's okay. All of the numbers are big. It's
I'm only
okay.
35, you know.
There was always going to be a chicken and egg problem with hypermedia systems. How do you create enough hypermedia when you have a hypermedia system to keep it interesting, to actually create that virtuous cycle of creation? So authoring has always had to go hand in hand with any hypermedia system. And the NLS, as the first instance of that, you can see that the NLS team bootstrapped, which is using the NLS to document and to create more NLS by using the NLS. So it becomes the first knowledge augmentation environment because the first thing it's doing is augmenting the knowledge about itself. And your microcosm project was very much like that. And I remember the very first versions of Netscape Navigator where there was a full editor built into the application. We've lost most of this now. People don't author the web, they consume the web. They might type text into a text box so it makes a post somewhere. They might edit a wiki. But these are all very, very carefully managed tasks. They have very manageable outcomes. How did we end up here?
Oh, well, okay, I can only tell it from my perspective, and the story about people not remembering where the demo was, I mean, you know, your memories are very personal in terms of what, but in 1968, I was a teenager living in the swinging 60s in London, right? So that's where my head was in the 60s. But I was well into mathematics, but as I moved into computing in the 1980s, I got into this whole idea of hypertext by reading Vannevar Bush's paper, seeing the demo, and Learning at the Feet of Ted Nelson. And I wanted to build a system very much on the lines of the MEMEX system. I mean, MEMEX memory extender, I think this was really interesting from Bush. It was the same sort of idea as, I mean, Doug was inspired by that, we know that, because of the augmentation. I wanted to build a hypermedia system that had allowed different views for different people, so different links for different people in different contexts. So you got the knowledge you wanted in your context. And that moved us towards the idea of having links that were entities that you could reason about, and having link bases, and the whole idea of generic links, and so in microcosm, we had a make link tool, we had a follow link tool, we have a compute link tool, which I hate to say was a preview of Google. We had it, the links were triples, so they were the prescient of, I didn't know it then, of the semantic web. We put all this together into a system, and I remember taking it to Paris in Hypertext 1990, and that's where I first met Tim. I'm not sure he remembers that, but that's what, we have a picture proving it. I remember also, and what's happening here is incredibly echoes the past, because the hypertext people, it's wonderful to be here with all these amazing pioneers. And we all went to San Antonio in '91. I don't think Doug was there. No, I'm sure he wasn't. But that we had, that's where I first saw Tim demo the web. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, he embeds his links in the documents. This isn't going to go anywhere, right? This is just not going to go anywhere. And I also remember Tim saying to me, and you've got your chance, Tim, to come back at this later, but I remember him saying to me later, much later, when we were working together on the semantic web, saying, Wendy, if only you'd listened to me back then, we could have incorporated your ideas at the front end of the web. But anyway, the key thing was it was so difficult to get people to author. And even when we paid them, it was hard to get people to author the links. And that was why we designed the generic links and the way to use, in fact, we were using simple AI to generate links with the idea of being able to use hypermedia across a large corpus of information, never envisaging that we'd have the size of the web that we have today. And I remember a dinner party, an amazing night at our house, my husband Peter's here, where we had, because both Doug and Ted were interested in what we were doing with microcosm, and we had plans to build a version of Augment with Doug, and we'd have a version of Ted's transclusions in microcosm. And we had a dinner party at our house where, I mean, it was just a magical evening where we were all in tears with Doug telling us about his experiences in the war and how that inspired the rest of his career, and, you know, just sort of heady days. And there's Frode Hegland, who captures some of that idea with liquid. We've got liquid space being demoed out there by Chris Gutteridge, which is all these ideas. And the thing is that that hypermedia is really, really difficult to author, right? And I think that's what's happened in the space today. I think if you need augmentation to do proper hypermedia authoring, and I think that if we'd managed to get people using the semantic web ideas earlier, we might have headed off some of what's happened. Because you need that sort of AI support for authoring to enable rich authoring, because human beings it's too difficult to do.
Because it's almost too much to keep track of.
Too much to keep track of. And I do think that, I've got other things I want to say, but I'll stop now, we can pick that up. It's just that I do think there's such a prescient moment here with Tim demoing Solid. Right. There's intermedia out there. There's our stuff on Chris is doing with liquid space, and Ted doing Xanadu. There's such echoes of 91 here, but I do think we can almost, it's back to the future, but with Solid and AI, I've not had a chance to talk about this, Tim, with this, I do think we can build the type of environment that Doug was envisaging all that time ago.
All right, Peter, so it's, I think, probably December 93, January 94. I'm giving a public demo of the web in San Francisco. And I was able to do that reasonably because I had access to something called Jerry and Dave's Guide to the World Wide Web. And the beautiful thing about that is it was organized as a taxonomy. So someone came in, I'm like, what are you interested in gardening? And I would find a resource. And I wouldn't tell them they were seeing the web, I would just find the resource for them. Now that was possible because in early '94, the web was basically unimaginably small, right? It was a single point, and that didn't last very long. And even by the middle of 1994, it had really overrun its capacity to keep any human-generated taxonomy going. And this led to the rise of the machines. And how has the rise of the machines then shaped our own access and the way we think of hyperlinked knowledge?
Yeah. So I think the solutions we get are in part driven by inspiration, and we're here because of those inspiring pioneers, and then in part driven by constraints of reality. And so, you know, we heard earlier about hardware costing $1 a byte or a bit, I forget which one it was, but now it's 10 billion times cheaper. And so that means you get different things and different types of solutions. And so the Yahoo directory was the right thing when we had a few tens of thousands of pages. Now that we have 1 trillion pages, it's the wrong thing. And the types of solutions you get are different. The hardware that you enable is different. So, you know, Doug and Ted and so on said, we got to fit all this stuff into a small database, and so we need consistency of links. They got to go both ways. And then Tim said, well, that's just too hard. Let's just discard that. Wendy says, well, there's all these things that you lose. You can't possibly get them back unless you could crawl and get a copy of the whole web and keep it in one place. And that was ridiculously impossible before it became possible. And I think some of these things are just accidents of timing. All right, so you talked about 2 Stanford grad students. Then a few years later, 2 other Stanford grad students said, let's make that copy of the web. And that happened at the exact right year where they could buy the disks and put it on their credit card. And so if it had been a year earlier, they probably would have had to give up control of the company to get funding to buy the disks, and whoever had control would have screwed it up. And if it had been a year later, somebody else would have done it first. So it came along just at the right time. And as the web grows, the way you want to make sense of it changes. It can no longer be Philo and Yang being the only experts. It can no longer be Kleinberg's idea of hubs and authorities, right? So we used to have these people who would personally curate pages saying, here's all the good links, and the search engines would find them. Now we've gone away from that, where it's just everything is out there. And links are still important, of course, but also the content itself and the natural language processing is important. And the kinds of answers you get are different, right? So we didn't realize it. When you started, you said, okay, you're interested in gardening or whatever, I can find a gardening page. Now it's, I have this particular plant and there's this tiny little bug that looks kind of like this, and what's going wrong? And it turns out there's an answer to that, right? Which there wasn't when there were only tens of thousands of pages. But when there's billions of pages, there's this long tail phenomena. So things that can't be organized into a hierarchy because there's just too many questions, but there's an answer for all. And so now we have a different solution that supports that.
But have we abandoned that idea of category and hierarchy in this pool of free text, rather than saying perhaps there's a space for both of them? Which I think the NLS said that there was a space for the structure. The world that we have today says that unstructured is fine, and yet I feel like that has then affected all of the billions of people and how we relate to the pool of hyperlinked knowledge.
So why do you want structure? One reason is because you want to back up and get an overview. Right. Say, what is this topic about? And you can do that if somebody pre-imposes a structure. Right. But you can also do it if you have the support to say, let's make up the structure on the fly. Right? So being able to answer that question of what's important here, what are the fundamental documents in this field, what's high quality versus low quality, and so on. You have to be able to answer that question. But it doesn't mean you have to pre-impose an ontology. You can figure that out on the fly.
We're gonna put a marker there. No, we're definitely gonna put a marker there. All right. So Wendy, you bring up this point, and I think this touches on what Peter is saying. We're now at the tipping point where they were at a tipping point with buying hard disks on credit cards. We're now at a tipping point with being able to buy artificial intelligence on the credit card, right? And that's now going to start to suffuse not just the massive augmentation of a Google, but the individual augmentation of our own experiences now. So do we now have that capacity to have the machinic intelligence to be able to work with us when we're creating these trails of links?
I think we're getting there. There's always a timeliness to this. Google was absolutely essential to the growth of the web, right? I don't think it would have grown to its capacity, the capacity it has, without the search engine that Google was and has become. And of course, the semantic web ideas are all in Google now with the knowledge graph. But when we were pushing the ideas of the semantic web in the 2000s, AI was not where it is today. No. And in fact, when I give talks about this, I don't know if Tim's ever heard me say this, but when I talk about the semantic web, we were talking about it at the web conferences in the early 2000s, the AI community took the idea, they loved the idea, and it went down what I call an AI rat hole. And it was very theoretical. It was about, can we build a global ontology? Can we merge ontologies? Can we? And that wasted, I think, quite a lot of time. It may have been important, but I think, because AI is not where it is then, was not where it is today. That's nearly 20 years later. And I think now we have the potential with what we understand about AI, and I would add, it isn't just about machine learning. I would add intelligent multi-agent systems into this. I think they're going to be absolutely crucial to personalize the knowledge that you get, because I think that's what's so, I think website design is in a miserable place in the world at the moment. And it's just being dumbed down, and it's all about marketing, and all the rich ideas that came from the hypermedia part of the web are disappearing. The example that shines out is Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. Because Wikipedia, because it's a relatively closed system and people care about what they write in Wikipedia. There's wonderful examples of hypermedia authoring in Wikipedia that is supported by the wonderful system we should all give money to today. To keep going, because it's a treasure. I wonder what Doug would have thought. When we teach about this, we talk about collective intelligence, and I do wonder if Doug would have agreed with us on that.
So I have to tell a little story that touches on both of this. So at OSU, there was a celebration of Doug's life and work in 2002, which is when I got to meet him. And I did this big talk about intelligence augmentation and all this stuff. And after I got off stage, someone walks up to me, and again, January 2002, said, "Have you heard of Wikipedia?"
Yeah.
So it was literally that moment, and there was something about his work being born in that form.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Wikis existed from 95.
Yeah.
And so there's a really long space of time there. And I think, and Howard was really referencing this, and I want both of you to comment on this, because it seems like we can build the technology, but the human cultural technology of being actually able to use and embody and then scaffold intelligence augmentation, that seems to be a much slower process than anyone maybe in this room had reckoned.
Well, I think there's two things there. One is nobody had a computer at home in 95, yeah. And the interfaces just were so primitive compared to what we have today, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. I always talk about the web going behind the screens, because finally we can talk to our computers. We will have brain-computer interfaces as we go forward. We've got gesture interfaces. The way we interact with our devices, most of us use it on the move. In 95, you had to be in a research lab to have the internet. And it was much harder, and it's taken time. And I think, the whole social network thing, you really had to be a bit of a programmer to do a website, to build something on the web in the 90s. Yeah. And most people were not going to learn that. So you had to wait for the browsers to get more interactive, so you could interact through natural language. Yeah. And then, of course, the social media platforms really do the hard work for people. That's why they like them.
Yeah, and I think we're still experimenting and trying to figure out, right? Christine was talking about collective effort, and Wikipedia is a great example of they came up with a framework that worked, but other examples don't work as well. So before Wikipedia, there was Newpedia, which said we're only going to allow experts to write. And that never took off because there wasn't enough effort behind it. And it turned out that freeing it up was the right step for that. In other places, freeing up and allowing anybody to comment devolves into Godwin's law or whatever. So I don't think we know yet what are all the parameters of, if I want to achieve this goal, what are the social constraints that I set up in order to achieve a good result?
So what's interesting here is one of the strengths of Wikipedia is that it establishes a taxonomy. It's that it's actually doing the hard thing, and it's why it requires all of us to do it, because you can't really automate taxonomies. It's one of the very hard problems in AI.
I think well, we're getting closer. I think we are.
No, and we will.
They do it.
We absolutely will continue to
Well,
get
it does.
closer. But Peter, where you were just talking about the fact that an individual can now create their own taxonomy, and again, this gets us into all sorts of interesting areas around truth and falsity, because you can create a false taxonomy with the same ease as creating a true taxonomy now. We have that capacity to be able to do it. Do we have, I guess, do we have the drive to do it? Because the machines are doing it for us, in some sense, are our skills in that area atrophying because we're just expecting it's always going to be done for us?
I think we want to harvest what people are good at, and there's different types of skills at different levels, right? So I think in the early days of the semantic web, we said, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to hire a bunch of logicians, and they're going to write first-order predicate calculus statements, and that didn't work. Yeah. But later on, we said, well, let's scale back a little bit. We have things like schema.org, and now if you're a store owner, here's a very simple way that you can post the open hours for your store, and you'll see an immediate benefit to yourself, and all your customers will see an immediate benefit. And so I think that's what we need to do, is we want to, so I was impressed by the way Doug talks about training, and I think that's important, that, it's easier to play an iPod than a violin, but you can do great things if you train yourself on the violin. And some people should be trained to do complicated stuff, but other people just say, I want to accomplish one thing, and I want to do it in the next 10 minutes, so don't make it too hard for me. Don't make me learn a big ontology. Just give me the capability to achieve what I want to achieve.
How do we need to think then when we're designing these systems so that we present the options so that people know that when it's good for them to have virtuosity, that it's there and they can be supported in that virtuosity, versus when they need expedience and they want to be supported in expedience?
Well, your example of the shop, the retailer who wants to just say when their shop's open, that's factual.
Right, that's
factual. I think it's the
expedience.
difference between factual and when you want to get knowledge about something or learn something in order to generate knowledge. You want the information to do, and that's much more nuanced and harder to do. And I think that's why I said we need intelligent agents. This is an idea that's been around for 20 years. It's got sort of lost in the machine learning wave, but it will come back. And I always envisaged it, microcosm was always, the filters in microcosm were always intelligent agents, but way ahead of their time in terms of what you could do with the technology. And I think that's where we should go in terms of using AI to help you develop your own personal ontologies. But this sort of language, most people are not going. It's got to be developed into systems that they can readily use. I think it's all about what do you want? What can you use in your everyday life? I mean, these things changed everything, right? And there will be other developments in technology that will be the next leap forward, right? So we will get those experiences.
How do we start to solve the problem around the hyperabundance of hyperlinked data that we have? We already have it. We have this trillion pages or whatever it is. How do we now start to work if we don't have classifications? How do we get to the human data that helps us separate truth from fiction? Because this is now an increasing, it's one of the front-facing problems for us as creators of these systems. How do we then do that? Because if you have a human classified system, if you have a fully realized NLS that was global, and presumably people would be putting a lot of effort into indexing and managing the classifications on that, then there would be some relationship there. How do we prevent the algorithms from accelerating us into?
So my answer to that would be open systems, because Wikipedia you've grown to trust, and it's because anyone can go in and, well, you have to be verified these days, I think, to edit in Wikipedia, but basically you've got a million eyes on this, and people will correct, and they will facts, and there will be debates about that. I think the problem we have is when you don't know who's serving you the links or the taxonomies. It's a black box that's coming from a company that purports to be wonderful and is actually trying to make you do something that's not what you'd want to do. That would be my answer to it.
Yeah, so I think you need to take care of the provenance, right? So you talked about the ontology and the organization. I don't think that's the issue, right? So the issue is who's putting the information in, and what is their background, and what is their intent. So are they knowledgeable about the topic? So should you believe them because of that? And do they have altruistic intent, or are they trying to manipulate you? And so that's what we need to uncover, and you can do that by trying to understand all this linkage of where they come from and what else are they doing. So we've been doing that for many years of fighting spam.
Well, that's been, as director of search quality, you were working on this algorithmically, because
it's one of the big things.
There's
right?
always been a cat.
I remember the day before there was a web, when I was on the ARPANET, and I read this message from somebody who sent out an advertisement. Yeah. And all of us in the lab were shocked. Yes. How could anybody do such a thing? How many here read that message, right? Yeah. Okay, we said, this is just wrong. How could anybody have the morals to do such a thing? And then, you know what? It happened again more than once. Right?
It was an advertisement for a law firm or something.
Yeah.
I think the other thing it just occurred to me is that we're all hypermediaing or authoring all the time. If we use WhatsApp or Instagram, of any of these, when we first started all this, to put a photo on a computer was really hard. Put a video on a computer was to do the sorts of things we're doing today, and we can do on our mobile phones. And you can, people are tweeting and sending photos all around the world. That's hypermedia authoring.
So, dub1, there are 5 photos online of the entire event in Geneva. All right, that's it, because there was no web to put the photos on, or hardly any. And it's this kind of thing that we don't have, in that sense, we don't have that record because it was too hard. And now
I've got the T-shirt.
I do still have the T-shirt, you're absolutely right.
And Tim's speech is online, which is where he talks about the semantic web, right at the very beginning. Yeah. So, but we don't have many records, no. It's true.
Okay, so if we want to be able to support different ways of looking, and this is, I think, where we want to do some both, I think, past and future gazing. If we want to think of a different way of approaching indexing and classification, and so if Google just disappeared tomorrow, and I don't think that's going to happen, but if it did, and we were forced to rethink how we were going to handle this sea of hyperlinked knowledge, what else would we might want to do with it? Vannevar Bush very much wanted us to think about associative trains of thought, associative trains of memory. And in some way, you can treat hyperlinked documents like that, but it's less explicit, clearly, than either he wanted or what Doug wanted. So how can we start to think about the fact that we have a planetary memory that maybe starts to feel more like our own memory?
Do you want to talk about that first? Or?
Yeah, so I think we always think of it as an integrated system, right? So you can't just say, let's make one company disappear, because that affects everything else, right? And even the links that are authored on the web, they're there because they were missing. And to the extent that Google and other companies are providing a service, you don't need to put a link that's already going to be answered by some other service. You need to put the ones that aren't going to be answered, right? And so there's this ecosystem where everything plays together. And if you disturb it by changing one thing, then it changes everything else. So you want to have the information that's needed. You want to be able to find it. And you want to be able to find what makes sense for you and what's true and relevant and useful. I think one of the things that's really interesting now is this idea of federated learning, where people are doing their own indexing on their own device. And we do that, and things like improving a speech recognition system, right? You want to crowdsource that. So you want everybody has their own system running on their own device, and it understands their own accent, and it gets better. Now you want to feed that back to help everyone else, but I can't say, oh, well, I'm going to upload all the speech that your device has heard, right? Because nobody wants to give up that privacy. But with federated learning, we have this ability to say, well, we're just going to upload some parameters of the neural network model that was learned on the device, and we have these guarantees that sharing those parameters will not reveal any of your private information, but it will make it better for everybody else.
And again, this is where AI is starting to enter the discussion again, is that we can build these learning systems and then use those as portable taxonomies, portable indexes, portable classifications,
right,
which will then help us author. So is this a new kind of bootstrapping that we're starting to see being born?
I don't think it's new, because I think we had that all along, but the point is that it's getting a lot better. Yeah. Since 2011, 2012 or so, we've seen these big jumps where we used to be getting 1 or 2% better a year, and now all of a sudden we get 20% better.
Oh, sorry.
No, please.
So my take on this is, I mean, when you ask what would happen if Google disappeared, well, nothing is going to stay the same. And one thing's for sure, companies do not last forever. Well, very few do. Google might be one of the exceptions to that rule, but some of the social networks are going to disappear. And then we have the whole issue, sitting here with Brewster in the front row, of what happens to all your memories when the companies you've entrusted them to disappear, which they will. Right? Yeah. And so nothing will stay the same. The technology will change. And the other thing that's different now to when we started 30 years ago is that governments are now heavily involved. Because when we started, the stories of when Vint and Bob started the internet didn't ask anyone's permission for what they did, because nobody was really interested in computers talking to each other. And when nobody took any notice of the web, or even Google when it first started, or even Facebook when they first started, right? Now we have a huge geopolitical influence on all this. And there's all the issues around how do we tax companies like the social networks? How do we make things work in a truly global environment when we've got very different cultural norms to deal with? I'm talking about China here and India and all these. So the spotlight is on this world, right? And I think we can't assume that things that work as they do today will be there tomorrow. But that doesn't. That's sort of pessimistic view. I think optimistically, one thing I wanted to say earlier was, these are live experiments. We are running these experiments
on the
live
world.
Experiments
on 4 billion people.
Yeah, right. And we can't, I mean, in some ways, you might want to say, well, actually, wish I hadn't done that. I wish we'd done this earlier or known that earlier. But you have to live with the fact that the technology wasn't there to do what you wanted 20 years ago. And so we've got, this is, I think, unprecedented in the world, really, in terms of these systems that we are building as live experiments. And they grow, not because of the not just because of the clever technology, because of what people do with them. And if people don't use them, they don't grow. And so it's all, it's a very, very complex world that we're in now. And so you're thinking about, now, if you're going to change something, build something new, it's another experiment. You're running on the world.
So speaking of the new, and I've been very involved in VR and AR for many years, and we're about to see this become a foreground technology rather than a background technology. But at the same time, when I was doing VRML work 25 years ago, authoring was very hard to do. It's still really hard to get people to author anything beyond a couple of boxes in 3D. So authoring and linking and classifying and searching. So it seems like as we move into a world where AR spectacles start to replace smartphones and things like this, that we're now about to run into the same kinds of problems all over again. So how do we take what we've learned about the world of text, because most of what we're talking about is text and images, and let that inform what may be happening now in 3D and in AR?
Well, I think this is why it's so important to look at historical thing. I mean, I don't know. I want to go around wearing AR glasses, but we had Google Glass as an experiment, and that's not gone away, has it? I don't think. I mean, it was a wonderful technology. So.
Right. Now it's come more of an industrial than a consumer product.
Because there's all the social consequences of walking, and that's what Google Glass showed us. People did not like being approached in the street or in a bar, in a restaurant, with goggles on that might take pictures of you, listen to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay?
But, well, depends on which people you ask.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
In Japan, there was no
Really?
resistance whatsoever.
Really?
They're just used to people going around and taking pictures.
Right, and I think in Australia there were bar fights. But that's Australia.
Yeah. Do you think we're really going to all walk around
Oh, I'm
with
absolutely.
goggles on?
The reason why is because it's going to be the solution to the problem of everyone staring down into their smartphone, because it basically takes all of that attention and then places it up into the world around us. And so for some people, it will be seen as a relief. It's not going to be universal, but it'll be seen as a relief because you've essentially allowed you to split your attention between looking out into the real world and having all of the data-driven world present with you.
You'll have to convince me. I haven't found an AR system that doesn't make me feel sick so far. So.
Right, and this is not a solved problem. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
But it is all about the interface we're going to be using in the future. I mean, I mentioned voice. Voice now, because of the development in speech recognition, is becoming a standard way to interact with the internet, and that's going to increase. And then it's how much can these systems that these guys are all building help explain things without a visual. All right, and then so a lot of stuff you can do without a visual, like the factual information of when's this store opened, that can come back with speech. You don't need a visual. In the labs, we've got brain-computer interfaces. So in the future, computers will read our minds. And then we're into an interestingly scary world, but there you go.
Okay, I want to give you both a couple of minutes to answer the final question. I'm going to give you both a magic wand. You can pick any of the paths less traveled and make that a superhighway. Which path would you pick? If you said, okay, that's something we didn't look enough into, and we need to lean into that and make that massive, what would you pick and why?
Well, I would go back to the personalized information. That was what always drove me, and I picked up on Vannevar Bush's associative linking ideas. That was what we were trying to build in Microcosm. And I think that's where the whole idea that started with the semantic web and is evolving now into knowledge graph and solid, I think this is really important, because that's I think the missing link. And if you the missing links, seriously, seriously, that's good. That's how you generate the missing links, if you use those technologies well. And it's all about personalizing, and it's all about trusting where the information comes from as well. This is absolute. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would like to create a world where everybody is a good citizen online.
Yeah.
You're going to need that wand.
Yeah. I guess I would agree with that. So my favorite philosopher /catcher said, when you see a fork in the road, take it. And so I guess the path I want to go down towards, and in preparing for this, I watched the video of the demo, and I also watched 20 years later the video of the Apple Knowledge Navigator. And, and the thing that really struck me about that was, in some sense, how primitive it was, right? So this researcher had a question, and today it was like, Yeah, I can answer that in a second. I can show you all the data. I can show you the maps of the weather or whatever it was he was looking for. But in the Knowledge Navigator video, it was, yes, I can answer that. I could connect you by phone to this researcher at another institution, and you can talk. And so in some sense, that seemed primitive. Why not just show the answer? But in another sense, it was great. And why can't we have more of that, of using our technology to build up relationships, rather than, as you say, everybody staring at their phone? Let's have them, yeah, you stare at your phone for a little bit, but then you make a personal connection. So I'd like to see more of that.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
We've got time.
Yeah, we've got time.
Education. As ever, the synergy with the web, I think, I mean, sitting next to the person who invented MOOCs effectively, we can do so much using the web and the internet we have to educate people all around the world. And educating people to be good citizens online is absolutely crucial, I think. And there's no magic, I wish there was, there isn't a magic wand to do that, because we see the whole of human nature on the internet. Good and bad. And so just as we educate people to be good citizens in the physical world, we have to find ways to educate people to be good citizens in the digital world. And so creating that type of education environment is one of my passions, but I wish I had that magic wand.
Yeah.
So that poem I began with concludes with these lines. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere, ages and ages hence, two roads diverged, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Let's thank Dame Wendy Hall and Peter Norvig.